The blood on the snow was the first thing he saw. A crimson trail leading into the white wilderness like a broken promise painted across God's frozen canvas. Preston Oakley had been tracking a wounded elk for the better part of 3 hours that February morning in 1884, his breath forming clouds in the bitter cold air of the Arizona highlands near Seligman. The town sat at an elevation where winter could be merciless, and this particular season had brought snowfall that folks would talk about for years to come. He had not expected to find a woman instead of his quarry, collapsed in a drift beside an outcropping of juniper trees, her dark hair matted with ice and blood, her lips blue as a winter sky. Preston dropped to his knees beside her, his gloved hands moving quickly to check for a pulse at her throat. There, faint but steady. She was alive, though barely. Her dress was torn, inadequate for this weather, and bruises marked her face and arms. Someone had beaten her badly. Someone had left her here to die. He did not hesitate. Preston gathered the woman into his arms, noting how light she felt, how fragile. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, stood nearby, steam rising from his nostrils. Preston secured the woman as best he could against his chest, mounted with difficulty, and turned toward his ranch 5 miles north. The elk could wait. This woman could not. The ride back tested every ounce of his skill as a horseman. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring words he could not understand. Once, she cried out, a sound of such anguish that Preston felt it like a knife between his ribs. He spoke to her in low, steady tones, the way he might gentle a spooked horse, telling her she was safe now, that he had her, that she would be all right. His ranch house stood solid against the white landscape, smoke rising from the chimney where he had banked the fire before leaving that morning. Preston managed to dismount without dropping his burden, kicked open the door and carried the woman inside. The warmth hit them like a wall. He laid her on his bed, the only bed in the small 2-room cabin, and began the work of saving her life. First, he needed to warm her slowly. Too fast, and he could do more harm than good. Preston had seen frostbite before, had lost a friend to it years back when they had been caught in a blizzard driving cattle. He removed her wet, frozen clothing with clinical efficiency, trying not to see the extent of the bruises that covered her body, the finger marks on her throat, the way her ribs showed too prominent beneath her skin. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, built up the fire until the room felt like summer, and set water to heat. For 3 days, she burned with fever. Preston sat beside her, sponging her forehead with cool cloths, coaxing water and broth between her cracked lips, changing the bandages on the cuts that marked her face and hands. He learned the landscape of her injuries intimately during those days. Someone had hurt her deliberately, systematically. The thought made something cold and hard settle in his chest. On the 4th day, she opened her eyes. They were brown, deep and dark as rich soil, and filled with terror. She tried to scramble away from him, a cry tearing from her throat, and Preston stepped back immediately, hands raised. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentle. "You are safe. No one is going to hurt you. My name is Preston Oakley. I found you in the snow 4 days ago. You have been sick with fever, but you are getting better." She stared at him, breathing hard, her eyes darting around the room as if cataloging escape routes. Preston stayed where he was, giving her space, letting her see that he meant no threat. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "My ranch, about 5 miles north of Seligman." "In Arizona." He paused. "What is your name?" She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. Then so quietly he almost missed it. "Deanna, Deanna Ward." "Deanna." He repeated it, liking the way it sounded. "Are you hungry? I have stew on the stove." She nodded, just barely, and Preston moved to the kitchen area, ladling the savory mixture into a bowl. When he returned, she had pushed herself up to sitting, the blankets clutched around her. He handed her the bowl and a spoon, noting how her hands shook. Deanna ate slowly, mechanically, as if she had forgotten the pleasure of food and knew only the necessity of it. Preston settled into the chair by the fire, giving her space, letting the silence stretch comfortable between them. He had always been a man of few words, content to let the world speak for itself. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and looked at him directly for the first time. "Thank you," she said, "for saving my life. Anyone would have done the same." No, her voice was firm despite its weakness. "They would not have." Preston wanted to ask what had happened, who had hurt her, but he could see the exhaustion pulling at her features. Those questions could wait. "You should rest more. Your body has been through a terrible ordeal." Diana nodded, already sinking back into the pillows. Within moments, she was asleep again, but this time it was the natural sleep of healing rather than the fevered unconsciousness of the past days. The days became a week, then two. Deanna grew stronger slowly, able to sit up for longer periods, to take short walks around the cabin. Preston maintained a careful distance, instinctively understanding that she needed space, needed to feel safe. He slept on a bedroll by the fire, conducted his ranch work during the day, and returned each evening to cook meals and check on his patient. It was nearly 3 weeks before she told him what had happened. They were sitting at his small table, eating the venison steaks he had prepared, when Diana set down her fork and spoke into the quiet evening. "My stepbrother did this to me." Preston's hand tightened on his own fork, but he said nothing, waiting. "His name is Marcus Ward. My father married his mother when I was 12 and Marcus was 16. My father died 2 years ago and his mother passed last fall. The ranch that had been my father's went to Marcus as the oldest male heir." Her voice was steady, but Preston could hear the effort it cost her. "He wanted me gone, wanted to sell the land without any complications, but I refused to leave. It was my home, my father's home." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "He had been drinking that day more than usual. We argued. He said terrible things. Then he started hitting me. I tried to fight back, but he was so much stronger. When I fell, he just kept going. I thought he was going to kill me right there in the house." Preston felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce, but he kept his expression neutral, letting her speak. "When he finally stopped, he dragged me outside. We were living in the high country near Flagstaff. There had been a big storm the night before. He dragged me out into the snow and left me there. I remember him standing over me, and he said, 'The cold will take care of what I started. No one will ask questions about a woman who wandered off into a blizzard and got lost.'" "How did you end up near Seligman?" Preston asked quietly. "I do not remember clearly. After he left, I knew I had to move or die. I crawled. I walked. I fell. I think I walked for hours, maybe days. Everything blurs together. The next clear memory I have is waking up here in your bed with you sitting beside me." Preston reached across the table and covered her hand with his own, the first time he had deliberately touched her since those early days of nursing. "You are safe here, Deanna. I give you my word. As long as you need a place to heal, this is it." She looked down at his hand on hers and tears slipped down her cheeks. "I have nowhere else to go, nothing. He has everything that was my father's, everything that was mine." "Then you stay here," Preston said simply, "for as long as you need." The weeks turned into months. Winter gradually loosened its grip on the high country, snow melting to reveal the red earth beneath. Deanna grew stronger day by day, her bruises fading to yellow then disappearing entirely, the cuts healing to thin white scars. But Preston noticed that some wounds ran deeper. She startled at sudden movements, went pale when men's voices drifted up from the road below the ranch, had nightmares that left her gasping and crying out in the dark. He gave her space to heal, just as he would give an injured animal time to recover. But he also gave her purpose. As she grew stronger, Deanna began helping with the household tasks, then with the lighter ranch work. Preston taught her to care for the chickens he kept, to tend the vegetable garden he planted as spring arrived, to ride Copper when he was not using the horse for work. She was a quick learner, sharp and observant. Preston found himself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit together, talking about everything and nothing. Deanna told him about her childhood, about her father who had been a dreamer, always chasing the next opportunity. About her real mother who had died when Deanna was small, a face she could barely remember. About books she had read and places she hoped to see someday. Preston, in turn, shared his own history. He was 26, had come west from Missouri at 18 seeking adventure and freedom. He had worked as a ranch hand, a drover, a deputy for a brief stint in Prescott that had convinced him law enforcement was not his calling. 5 years ago, he had bought this land with money saved from years of hard work, built the cabin with his own hands, and started building a herd. It was a small operation, just him and about 50 head of cattle, but it was his. "Why did you never marry?" Deanna asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Preston considered the question. "Never found the right woman, I suppose." "Never found anyone who made me want to change my life." He paused. "What about you? You are what, 22, 23? No young men courting you before everything happened." 22, Deanna confirmed. "And no, Marcus made sure of that. He told anyone who showed interest that I was spoken for, or not right in the head, or that my father owed him money. Anything to drive them away. I think he enjoyed having control over me, enjoyed watching me become more and more trapped. He sounds like a man who needs a reckoning." Deanna turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I do not want you going after him, Preston. I do not want you risking yourself for my sake. He is dangerous and he has friends, other men as cruel as he is." "I am not planning to ride to Flagstaff and call him out," Preston assured her. "But if he ever shows his face around here, he will answer for what he did to you." Something shifted between them that evening, a door opening that neither had quite acknowledged was there. Preston became more aware of Deanna's presence, of the way lamplight caught in her hair, of her laughter when he told a particularly bad joke, of the competent grace with which she moved through the world. Deanna, for her part, watched Preston with new eyes, seeing not just her rescuer but a man of quiet strength, of fundamental decency, someone who made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before. Spring turned to summer. The garden flourished under Deanna's care, providing fresh vegetables that improved their meals considerably. The cattle fattened on good grass. Preston expanded the corral and started breaking a young Mustang he had caught, with Deanna watching from the fence rail, calling encouragement. They developed routines, rhythms, a domestic harmony that felt as natural as breathing. Preston would wake before dawn, start coffee, and find Deanna already up, making biscuits or frying bacon. They would work through the day, sometimes together, sometimes on separate tasks, and come together again for dinner. The evenings were Preston's favorite time, when they would sit and talk or simply exist in comfortable silence. It was late June when Preston finally admitted to himself that he had fallen in love with Deanna Ward. They were mending fence on the eastern boundary of his property, working side by side in the warm sunshine. Deanna had taken off her bonnet, and her dark hair gleamed in the light. She was telling him a story about something that had happened when she was a child, animated and laughing, and Preston felt his heart turn over in his chest with the simple perfection of the moment. He loved her strength and resilience, loved her kindness and wit, loved the way she hummed while she worked, and the way she checked on the chickens each night to make sure they were safely roosted. Loved that she was not afraid of hard work, that she spoke her mind, that she treated him as an equal partner in all things. But he said nothing. Deanna had been through too much, had too much healing still to do. Preston would not complicate her recovery with his feelings, would not put pressure on her when she was still finding her footing in the world again. If all he could be to her was a friend and a safe harbor, then that would be enough. It would have to be. Diana, working beside him under that summer sun, was having very similar thoughts. She had fallen in love with Preston Oakley somewhere between February and June, in the accumulation of small kindnesses and quiet moments. She loved his steadiness, the way he never raised his voice, never moved too quickly, never made her feel afraid. She loved his competence, the way he could fix anything that broke, gentle any animal that spooked, find solutions to problems with calm patience. She loved his hands, strong and calloused from work but infinitely careful. She loved the rare smile that transformed his usually serious face into something beautiful. But she said nothing. Preston had saved her life, had given her a home when she had nothing. She would not repay that by burdening him with feelings he might not share, by making things awkward when he had been so generous. If all she could be to him was a friend and a help around the ranch, then she would be grateful for that. It was more than she had any right to expect. So they continued through the summer, two people in love and neither willing to speak of it, dancing around each other with exquisite politeness while their hearts ached with words unspoken. It was a traveling preacher who finally broke the stalemate. Reverend Thomas came through Seligman in late August, holding a week of revival meetings in the town. Preston and Deanna rode in together for the Sunday service, sitting in the back of the makeshift congregation. The preacher was a fiery speaker, passionate about sin and redemption, but it was his closing message that struck home. "Life is short, brothers and sisters," Reverend Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Too short to waste on fear and hesitation. If you love someone, tell them. If you have wronged someone, make it right. Do not wait for tomorrow, because tomorrow is not promised to any of us." On the ride back to the ranch, Deanna was quiet, the preacher's words echoing in her mind. Preston, too, seemed lost in thought, his hands loose on Copper's reins as the horse picked his way along the familiar trail. They were almost home when Deanna spoke. "Preston, I need to tell you something." He turned to look at her, concern immediately crossing his features. "What is it?" "Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I need to tell you that I love you. I have loved you for months now, and I know I have no right to say it, no right to expect anything from you after all you have already done for me. But that preacher today made me realize I could not keep silent any longer. You deserve to know the truth of my feelings, even if you do not share them." Preston pulled Copper to a stop and dismounted in one smooth motion. He came to stand beside Deanna's horse, looking up at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Dismount," he said quietly. Diana's heart sank. He was going to let her down gently, going to tell her he cared for her as a friend, but nothing more. She slid from the saddle, standing before him on the dusty road, bracing herself for rejection. Preston took her hands in his blue eyes intense on hers. "Deanna Ward, I have loved you since June. Since that day, we were mending fence and you were laughing in the sunshine, and I realized you had become the center of my world. I have been holding back because I did not want to pressure you, did not want you to feel obligated to me because I helped you. But if you are telling me your feelings are real, that you love me of your own free will with no sense of debt or duty, then I am telling you right now that I love you with everything I am." Joy bloomed in Diana's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "I love you," she said again, because she could, because he wanted to hear it. "Not out of gratitude, though I am grateful. Not out of obligation, though I owe you my life. I love you because of who you are, because you are kind and good and strong. Because you make me feel safe and valued and cherished. Because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Preston pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Diana melted into his embrace. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other on the road between town and home, while the horses grazed peacefully nearby, and the Arizona sun beat down warm on their shoulders. When Preston finally pulled back, it was only far enough to cup Diana's face in his hands and kiss her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, a first kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. Diana kissed him back with all the love in her heart, her arms tight around his neck, thinking that she had never been so happy in her entire life. They rode the rest of the way home hand in hand, laughing like children, giddy with the joy of finally speaking the truth. At the ranch, Preston lifted Diana from her saddle and kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, until they were both breathless. "Marry me," Preston said against her lips. "I know we have only known each other 7 months, but I know my own heart. Marry me, Diana, be my wife." "Yes," Diana breathed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married the following Sunday by Reverend Thomas before he left town. It was a simple ceremony held in the same space where they had attended the service the week before, with half the town in attendance. Diana wore a dress borrowed from the general store owner's wife, simple but pretty in pale blue. Preston wore his best shirt and the string tie he had bought in Prescott years ago, and never had occasion to wear, when the Reverend pronounced them man and wife. Preston kissed his bride with such tenderness that several women in the audience sniffled into their handkerchiefs. Diana felt tears on her own cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears, tears of gratitude for the unlikely path that had brought her to this moment. The townspeople hosted a celebration afterward, with food and music and dancing. Diana waltzed with her new husband in the dusty street, feeling like she was floating, like nothing in the world could ever hurt her again with Preston's arms around her. As the sun set and they prepared to ride back to the ranch, back to their home, a man stepped forward from the crowd. He was older, weathered, with kind eyes and a sheriff's badge on his chest. "Mr. Oakley, Mrs. Oakley," he said, tipping his hat. "I wanted to offer my congratulations and also some information you might find useful." "Sheriff Campbell," Preston greeted him. "What information would that be?" "Word came through from Flagstaff a few days back. Marcus Ward is dead. Seems he got into a drunken brawl and pulled a knife on the wrong man. The other fellow shot him in self-defense. The law cleared him of any wrongdoing." The sheriff looked at Diana with understanding in his eyes. "I heard you were his stepsister, that you had been living up that way before you came to Seligman. I thought you would want to know." Diana felt Preston's arm tighten around her waist, supporting her. She took a breath, processing the information. Marcus was dead. The man who had nearly killed her, who had haunted her nightmares for months, was gone from the world. She felt no grief. Perhaps that made her a bad person, but she could not mourn him. What she felt was release, a burden lifting that she had not fully realized she was carrying. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff," she said quietly. "I appreciate you taking the time." "There is more," the sheriff continued. "Seems Marcus Ward died without a will. His mother's family came forward, but they did not want the ranch, too far out for them to manage. The territorial court looked into his affairs, and found records showing the land originally belonged to your father, Mrs. Oakley. With Marcus dead and no other heirs, the property reverts to you as the only surviving child of the original owner. Diana stared at him, shocked. The ranch is mine. Yes, madam. Papers will take a few months to process through the courts, but it is yours free and clear. The lawyer handling the estate is a Mr. Brennan in Flagstaff. You can write to him to start the proceedings. After the sheriff left, Deanna stood in the street trying to absorb what she had just learned. Marcus was dead. The ranch was hers. The land her father had loved, the home of her childhood, belonged to her now. Preston turned her to face him, his eyes searching her face. Are you all right? I think so. Deanna shook her head, still dazed. I never thought I would get it back. I had made peace with losing it forever. What do you want to do? Preston asked. We could sell it, use the money to expand operations here, or we could move there if you want to go back. Or we could hire someone to manage it and keep it in the family. Whatever you want, Deanna. It is your inheritance. Diana looked at her husband, at the man who had saved her life and captured her heart, at the home they had built together over the past months. I want to sell it, she said firmly. That place holds nothing but bad memories for me now. My home is here with you, but the money from the sale could help us build something better here. A bigger house, maybe, more land, a future. Preston smiled and kissed her forehead. Then that is what we will do together. They rode home in the twilight, husband and wife, the past finally laid to rest and the future stretching bright before them. The next 2 years were the happiest of Diana's life. They sold the Flagstaff property and used the proceeds to expand the ranch, buying adjoining land and increasing their herd. Preston hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Deanna managed the household and the substantial garden that now fed not just them, but provided vegetables to sell in town. They built a new house, larger and more comfortable, with a real bedroom and a separate kitchen and a parlor with windows that looked out over the valley. Deanna learned to run a ranch alongside her husband, becoming as competent with cattle and horses as she was with cooking and preserving. Preston learned to share his life with another person, to make decisions together, to value Diana's opinions and ideas as much as his own. Their love deepened with time and familiarity. They learned each other's moods and quirks, learned to communicate with a glance or a touch. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they learned to fight fair and always made peace before sleeping. The nightmares that had plagued Diana in those early months faded to occasional shadows, easily soothed by Preston's presence beside her. In the spring of their 2nd year of marriage, Diana realized she was pregnant. She told Preston on a Sunday morning, watching his face as understanding dawned. The joy that lit his features made her heart overflow. He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, laughing, then immediately set her down again, worried he had been too rough. I am pregnant, not made of glass, Deanna said, amused. I can handle being spun around. I am going to be a father, Preston said wonderingly. We are going to have a baby. You are going to be a wonderful father, Deanna told him, meaning every word. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Deanna remained active throughout, refusing to treat her condition as an illness. She worked the garden, rode horses until her belly grew too large to sit comfortably in the saddle, and continued managing the household. Preston hovered, constantly worried, until Deanna finally sat him down and told him firmly that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she would be fine. Their son was born in December 1886, 2 days before Christmas, during a cold snap that had everyone bundled in layers of wool and fur. Deanna labored through the night with Preston beside her, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. The doctor from Seligman attended, along with 2 women from town who served as midwives. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Preston wept. He held his son with trembling hands, this tiny person who was half him and half the woman he loved, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. They named him James Robert Oakley, after both their fathers. Jamie, they called him, and he grew into a bright, happy child who looked like Deanna but had Preston's quiet temperament. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. Deanna marveled at the capacity of the human heart to expand, how she could love Preston as much as ever while also loving this small person with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. Preston proved to be a devoted father, patient and gentle, carrying Jamie around the ranch from the time he could hold his head up, pointing out cattle and horses and birds, narrating the world for his son. The ranch continued to prosper. By the time Jamie was 2, Preston had expanded the herd to over 200 head. They employed 4 ranch hands full-time and hired extra help during roundup and branding season. Deanna's garden had grown into a substantial operation, with a root cellar for storage and regular sales to the general store in town. When Jamie was 3, Deanna became pregnant again. This time, the birth brought them a daughter, Catherine Ann, who they called Katie. She had Preston's blue eyes and a temperament as fierce as a summer storm. Where Jamie was content to sit and watch the world, Katie wanted to be in the middle of everything, crawling at 6 months and walking at 9, a whirlwind of energy and determination. Preston and Diana's love continued to grow through the years, deepening and maturing like good wine. They had built something together, a life and a family and a legacy. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Deanna would think back to that day in the snow, to the moment Preston had found her and chosen to save her life. Everything good in her world had flowed from that single act of kindness. She told him that one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. Jamie was 7 now, Katie 4, and Diana was grateful every day for the family they had built. "I was just thinking about the day you found me," she said, her hand in Preston's. "About how different my life might have been if you had decided to keep tracking that elk instead of stopping to investigate the blood in the snow." Preston squeezed her hand. "I cannot imagine my life without you in it, without any of this. You and the children, you are everything to me." "You saved me," Deanna said softly. "In every way a person can be saved." "No," Preston corrected gently. "I found you, you saved yourself. You were strong enough to survive, strong enough to keep walking when most people would have given up, strong enough to heal and build a new life. I just had the privilege of being there while you did it." Deanna leaned her head on his shoulder, watching Jamie help Katie climb onto the fence rail, patient and protective of his little sister. "We built a good life, Preston, a happy life." "The best life," Preston agreed. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. Jamie grew into a thoughtful young man who loved ranching as much as his father, who could gentle a wild horse with patience and quiet words. Katie grew into a spirited young woman who could outride most of the ranch hands and had opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics. Deanna and Preston grew older together, their hair silvering, their bodies showing the marks of years of hard work, but their love remained as strong as ever. They still sat together on the porch most evenings, holding hands, watching the sunset, grateful for the life they had built from the ashes of Diana's darkest moment. When Jamie turned 20, he married a girl from Seligman, and within a year they had given Preston and Deanna their first grandchild, a little girl they named Deanne, after her grandmother. Katie, at 17, showed no interest in settling down, declaring she wanted to see more of the world before she thought about marriage. Preston and Diana supported her dreams, whatever they might be. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Preston took Diana back to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. The landscape had not changed much. Juniper trees still dotted the hillside. Snow still fell in winter, though never again as severely as that year of 1884. 20 years, Diana said, looking around at the place that had once meant her death, but had instead become the beginning of her real life. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I love you just as much now as I did that day I realized what you meant to me, Preston said. More if that is possible. You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Diana Oakley. And you are mine, Diana replied, turning to kiss him. My rescuer, my husband, my love, the best man I have ever known. They stood together in that place of new beginnings. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and meaning from circumstances that might have destroyed a lesser bond. The snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting down from a gray sky, and Preston pulled Diana close, sheltering her against the cold just as he had done 20 years before. But this time, Diana was not a broken woman left to die. She was strong and whole and deeply loved. She had a family, a home, a legacy. She had survived the worst that life could throw at her and come through it to find joy on the other side. As they walked back to where they had left the horses, Diana thought about the girl she had been, crawling through the snow, certain she would die alone and unmourned. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that a man named Preston Oakley would find her, that he would give her time to heal, would fall in love with her as she fell in love with him, that they would build a beautiful life together, full of children and laughter and honest work, that the pain would fade and the scars would heal and the nightmares would stop. But that girl was gone, transformed by suffering and survival into the woman Diana had become. She would not erase those hard months even if she could. They had taught her strength. They had brought her to Preston. They had shaped her into someone who could appreciate the value of kindness, of safety, of love given freely without conditions or expectations. The ranch came into view as they rode over the rise, smoke curling from the chimney, lights glowing warm in the windows. Home. Their home. Built with their own hands and their own dreams, filled with people they loved. Jamie and his wife were there for the anniversary dinner, bringing little Diane, who was walking now and getting into everything. Katie had cooked, displaying the domestic skills she claimed not to possess, creating a feast that would have fed twice their number. The ranch hands had been invited too, the ones who had been with them longest, men who had become like family over the years. They ate and talked and laughed, telling stories, celebrating not just Preston and Diana's anniversary but the life they had all built together. Diana looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved, felt Preston's hand warm in hers, and thought that she was the luckiest woman alive. Later that night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Preston and Diana stood at their bedroom window looking out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. "I have been thinking," Preston said slowly, "about what we have built here, about what happens to it when we are gone." "Jamie will run the ranch," Diana said. "He loves it as much as you do, and Katie, wherever she ends up, will always have a home here if she needs it. I know, but I want to make sure it is all written down properly. Want to make sure that what is ours passes to our children without any questions or legal troubles. I do not ever want them to face what you faced with Marcus, fighting for what is rightfully theirs." Diana turned to him, touched by his foresight. "That is a good idea. We will go to the lawyer in Prescott next month, have all the papers drawn up properly. And I want to make sure you are protected too. Preston continued. "If something happens to me, I want you to have full control of everything. No one questions your right to this place, to this life." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Deanna said firmly, but she knew he was being practical. Ranch life was dangerous. Accidents happened. It was wise to plan for every possibility. They went to Prescott the following month, as promised, and had a lawyer draw up papers that left everything to Deanna if Preston died, and to their children if they both passed. The lawyer praised Preston's forethought, noting that too many families ended up in bitter legal battles because the father had not taken the time to make his wishes clear in writing. With that settled, life continued its pleasant rhythm. The years accumulated gently, each one bringing its own small joys and occasional sorrows. They lost ranch hands to other opportunities, hired new ones. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good years when the cattle brought top prices. They attended weddings and funerals, welcomed new grandchildren into the family, said goodbye to old friends. Through it all, Preston and Diana remained the steady center of their world, two people whose love had been forged in adversity and tempered by time into something unbreakable. They worked side by side every day, knew each other's thoughts often before they were spoken, moved through life with the ease of two people who had become essential to each other's existence. When Preston turned 50 and Diana was 46, they decided to take a trip. Katie, now married herself and living in Phoenix, invited them to visit. It would be the first time they had left the ranch for more than a few days in years. The trip to Phoenix felt like an adventure. They took the train, marveling at how the world had changed since they were young. The journey that would have taken weeks on horseback now took less than a day. Phoenix itself was a revelation, a growing city with electric lights and paved streets, so different from the rough frontier town Seligman had been when they first arrived. Katie showed them around with pride, introducing her husband and their two children, a boy and a girl. Deanna delighted in her daughter's obvious happiness, in seeing that Katie had found a good man who supported her strong will rather than trying to break it. But after 2 weeks, both Preston and Deanna were ready to go home. The city was interesting but overwhelming. They missed the quiet of the ranch, the space, the rhythm of life they had built over decades. The train ride back felt like coming up for air. As they crested the rise that gave the first view of their ranch, Preston and Deanna both let out simultaneous sighs of relief. They were home. Jamie met them at the station in Seligman, full of news about everything that had happened while they were gone. A new calf born, a fence section that needed replacing, a buyer who had come through looking at their herd. Normal things, ranch things, the details that made up their everyday life. That night, back in their own bed, Deanna curled against Preston's side the way she had done for almost 30 years. "I am glad we went," she said. "Katie is happy and it was good to see her life, but I am even more glad to be home." "This is where we belong," Preston agreed. "This land, this life, everything we have built together, I would not trade it for anything." The years continued their gentle march. Preston and Deanna both knew they were in the autumn of their lives, but it was a beautiful season, rich with the harvest of years of hard work and devotion. Their children were settled and happy. Their grandchildren were growing into good people. The ranch was prosperous and would continue to be so under Jamie's management. On a spring evening in 1916, 32 years after Preston had found Diana in the snow, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Preston was 74 now, Deanna 70. Both were still active, still working the ranch every day, though they moved slower and tired more easily than they once had. "Do you remember the first sunset we watched together?" Preston asked. "After you had been here about a month, still healing." We sat out here, and I told you about coming west from Missouri." "I remember," Deanna said softly. "I remember thinking I had never felt so safe in my entire life as I did sitting beside you that evening." "I was already falling in love with you then," Preston admitted. "I told myself I was just being a good host, making you feel welcome. But I was falling, and I did not even fully realize it yet. I fell in love with you while you were nursing me through the fever," Deanna confessed. "I would wake up sometimes and see you there, patient and kind, and I would think that I had never known a man could be like you. Good all the way through, not because he wanted something in return, but because it was simply who he was." Preston pulled her closer, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They had seen thousands of sunsets together over the years, but each one still felt precious, still felt like a gift. The ranch continued through the seasons, through the cycles of birth and growth and harvest. Preston and Deanna grew older together, their steps slower, their faces lined with time, but their love as strong as ever. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy not just of land and cattle but of family and love, and the knowledge that even from the darkest moments, something beautiful could grow. When Deanna was 75 and Preston 79, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch house was full of noise and laughter. Multiple generations gathered to honor the couple who had started it all. Jamie stood to give a toast, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "My parents taught me many things over the years. How to run a ranch, how to be honest in all my dealings, how to work hard and take pride in what I build. But the most important thing they taught me was how to love well, how to be a partner, not just a spouse, how to support and cherish the person you have chosen to spend your life with. They have shown me for 50 years what a good marriage looks like, and I am grateful every day for their example." Katie stood next, tears in her eyes. "My mother survived something that would have destroyed most people. And my father gave her the space and time to heal, the safety to become herself again. They built this life together from nothing, from a chance encounter on a frozen mountain. They taught me that strength comes in many forms, that love is patient and kind and enduring. They are the best people I know, and I am honored to be their daughter." Deanna wept openly as her children spoke, Preston's arm tight around her shoulders. They had raised good people who had gone on to raise good people in turn. What more could any parent ask? The party continued late into the night, but eventually everyone left or went to bed, and Preston and Deanna found themselves alone in the living room of the home they had built together. 50 years, Deanna said wonderingly. Half a century. "When you found me in that snow, did you ever imagine we would end up here?" "I could not have imagined any of this," Preston admitted. "I was just trying to save your life. I had no idea you would end up saving mine right back." "I saved your life," Deanna turned to him, surprised. "How?" "I was lonely before you came," Preston said simply. "I had my work and my land, and I told myself that was enough. But it was not. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me love and family and joy. You made my life full in ways I did not even know it was empty." Deanna kissed him, this man who had been her savior and her partner and her love for 50 years. "We saved each other then. We built this life together, from nothing but determination and hope and love." They sat together in the quiet house, two old people who had lived a full and happy life, who had weathered every storm and celebrated every triumph side by side. Outside, the Arizona night was cool and clear, stars brilliant in the dark sky. The ranch slept peacefully around them, a testament to decades of hard work and careful stewardship. Preston and Deanna Oakley had started with nothing but each other and built an empire of love. They had raised children who honored them, created a legacy that would continue for generations. They had loved each other well and truly for 50 years, and they would love each other until their last breaths and beyond. That night, as they lay in bed together, Deanna thought back one final time to that girl in the snow, broken and dying, abandoned by the person who should have protected her. She thought about the impossibility of that moment, the million ways it could have gone differently. If Preston had been tracking elk in a different direction, if he had decided the blood trail was not worth investigating, if he had found her but decided not to risk his own resources on a stranger. But he had been there, he had investigated, he had saved her, and from that single act of compassion an entire life had bloomed, a love story that had spanned 50 years and counting. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who existed because Preston Oakley had a kind heart and Diana Ward had been strong enough to survive. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible on that frozen day so long ago. It was everything. It was perfect. It was home.